So for this video, I want to talk a little bit about the self as dramatic effect. This particular perspective on selfhood is primarily attributed to Irving Goffman. Irving Goffman's a mid-20th century American symbolic interactionist, maybe one of, if not the most important sociologist of the 20th century, wrote a prolific number of essays and books covering a wide range of interaction level analysis and insight and theory. Probably the most famous of his books is a 1959 piece. It's a book called "The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life," and in this book, Goffman proposes a way of thinking about self that is much more explicitly sociological than any of the previous theories. So one thing that you can recognize, even as you acknowledge the importance and the value of the contribution of theorists like Cooley or Mead or Kuhn or Zerker or any of these others, is that they're still largely thinking about and looking at the self in ways that are very, very similar to how psychology is looking at the self, right? They're concerned with internal cognitive processes. They're looking at self-reported data on internal processes and structures. And Goffman comes along and he writes this book. And in this book, he argues that internal conceptions of the self, which would be exactly what Mead and Cooley and Kuhn and Zerker are talking about. Internal conceptions of the self, he says, are less important than those that get expressed. So what he's saying here is that whatever's going on inside your head, whatever your self-concept is, whatever sort of conversation unfolds between the I and the me, in that kind of reflexive notion of selfhood, all of that is interesting perhaps, but not as important as the stuff we actually do, because the stuff we actually do is the stuff that has consequence. So, in your head, if you imagine yourself to be a very brave person, right? If that is your self-concept, but in actuality, every time there's a confrontation, you find a way to avoid it, you are not in any way, shape, or form a brave person, right? And not in any way that has any consequence. So Goffman's arguing that for sociological analyses of the self, we kind of have to ground those analyses in the social side of selfhood, not the internal and cognitive parts of selfhood. And he proposes in this book that we already have a language and a simile to kind of draw upon that would allow us to do an analysis of the behavioral aspects of interaction, and that is the language of theater. So he proposes what we call a dramaturgical analysis, and this is the study of this is the study of social interaction as a kind of theater, right, in which people, who would be the actors, portray images, which would be the statuses and roles that they occupy in front of others who would be analogous to the audience. Now, it's very important, right, when he proposes this, and in subsequent essays as he develops the concept further, it's very, very important that you understand that he isn't saying that life is theater, right? That would be a metaphor. And he's not using a metaphor, he's using a simile. He's saying that life is like theater. That there are performative aspects to selfhood, that the selves that others see are the ones we show them, much like the personalities and the characters that stage actors or film actors inhabit are those that they express. They're not really, the actor on the stage is not really Hamlet. It's an actor on the stage, but he's portraying Hamlet, and we suspend our disbelief and we lose ourselves in the story, and we come to recognize that the person on the stage is Hamlet, even though obviously they are not. But what makes that actor Hamlet isn't the actor, it's the words and it's the actions that the script sort of dictates. So, let's say you go to see the play, you go to see Hamlet, and you really like it and you decide to go back for a subsequent performance. But in the subsequent performance, the actor who was playing Hamlet is now playing Polonius. And the actor who was playing Polonius is now playing Hamlet. You're not going to jump up in the middle of the play and say, whoa, 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 stop, time out. No, this is all wrong. That guy up there is not Hamlet. That's Polonius. I was here last week. What are you guys trying to pull, right? If you were to do that, people would, kindly ask you to leave the theater, or maybe not so kindly ask you to leave the theater because you're clearly nuts, right? So he's not saying that people aren't the parts that they perform. They're not the selves that they present, but rather what he's saying is that nobody knows the self you are until you show it to someone, until you perform it. And so his thrust is that people engage in this activity that we call impression management. And impression management is essentially what it sounds like, right? It's the efforts that we engage in to talk and act in certain ways, or to avoid talking or acting in certain ways, so that people form desired views of us and of our situation, right? We're trying to steer people toward a particular definition of the situation. We want them to see us the way that we want to be seen, the way that it's advantageous for us to be seen in that situation. And so our behaviors, our actions toward those other people, the things that we do, the things that we say, signal to them the self that we are trying to establish. He says this is helped tremendously by the resources that we have at our disposal. So, for example, he talks a lot about something we call the personal front. And the personal front is just the expressive equipment that we have, essentially, to either consciously or unconsciously use as we present ourselves to others. And those elements of the personal front can be basically broken down into three categories: setting, appearance, and manner. So the setting, of course, is what it sounds like. It's the spatial and physical items in a situation that we use in staging our performance. So in a classroom, I might use the smart podium and the whiteboard and the view screen to sort of reinforce the performance that I'm engaging in as professor. Appearance is the stuff that is specific to us, personal items that identify us as individuals in particular roles and statuses, and that inform others of those roles and statuses. So the T-shirt probably doesn't do much to sort of put me in that category as pretty much everybody else in the class is also wearing a T-shirt, but the jacket that I wear over it with the little elbow patches, right, or the notes that I bring with me, the marker and that I use to write on the board, right? All of those things that I carry with me sort of signal to the audience the part that I'm performing, the impression that I'm trying to create or manage. And then finally, there is manner, and manner refers to the expressions that reveal our style of behavior, the mood that we're trying to set, the dispositions that we feel or are inclined to feel in certain situations. So, in essence, the tone of our performance, right? So we use all of those things collaboratively to sort of perform a version of self for the audience. Goffman also talks about regions of self-presentation behavior, right? And sticking with the theatrical or the dramaturgical language, he talks about it in terms of front stage and backstage. So front stage is what it sounds like, right? Front stage is where social interaction is performed in a way that allows the performer to maintain or to try to maintain appropriate impressions or Yeah, performances that are designed to create or maintain particular impressions. So when we are interacting with other people, we are always front stage because there is an audience there. Even if it's an audience that knows us well, we are still consciously and unconsciously doing and giving off information, doing things and giving off information that signals to our audience things about us, right? So that's anytime you're in the presence of another person, you are front stage. Anytime you are alone, you are what we would call backstage, right? So the backstage area is the area that is away from the view of others. It's where people can rehearse. They can think about what they're going to wear. They can consider how an audience might respond to them. Um, it is not quite that cut and dry. So generally speaking, I think the front stage backstage distinction really helps. But I want to point out some ways in which it can get kind of complicated, but do it in a way that I hope allows you to see what exactly Goffman's kind of getting at here. So imagine that you're a server in a restaurant. And some people come in and they sit at one of your tables in your area. You come up to them, you're very attentive. You're welcome to our restaurant. Um, um, my name is Jim. I'm going to be your server tonight. I'll talk about the dinner specials in just a moment. Is there a drink or drink orders that I can place for any of you? Yeah, right. Very attentive, very engaging, personable, right? Because you want this audience to form a favorable impression of you, which is that you're attentive and that you're focused on them, with the idea that presumably the payoff is that you're going to get a nice tip. You leave the front part of the restaurant, you go into the kitchen, and now you are backstage to that audience, right? They can't see you, they don't know what you're saying or doing, they can't observe you in any way, so you have gone backstage. When you are back there, you can complain about the people at that table. You can, roll your eyes at the ridiculousness of the order that they're placing, or the annoying number of modifications to the items that they'd like you to make, whatever it is, right? But you are doing those things. You're issuing those complaints to another audience, which is the audience of coworkers who are back in the kitchen, the cooks, the prep staff, the bus boys that are back there, any other wait staff that might be in the back of the house, right? So you're front stage to them. You're backstage to one audience while you are simultaneously front stage to another audience. Then when you leave the kitchen, you go back out onto the floor to your table, you are now front stage once again with that audience, but you are now backstage to the audience that you just left behind. So at no point are you out of the view of others, but because you are out of the view of specific others, you are still backstage. Another way that this might be kind of complicated is when two people, or maybe even more than two people, but let's keep it simple and say when a couple of people decide to sort of treat the rest of the people in an interaction as if they are backstage. So maybe two people kind of turn their back a little bit to the other people in a group, and they have what is clearly meant to be a conversation just for these two people. Now, everybody over here still sees that you're having this conversation, so in a sense you're kind of front stage, but it's clear that you're treating these other people as if you are now backstage to them, because you're kind of screening off the interaction that's unfolding between you and this other person in a way that signals to them that they're not really supposed to be part of it. So I would say that, just to keep it as clear as possible, understand that front stage and backstage are determined by where you are relative to a specific audience. In some instances, it's going to be blindingly obvious that you're backstage, right? If you are completely alone and by yourself, definitionally you're backstage. Anytime you're in the presence of social others, you're front stage, but the degree to which you're front stage and the degree to which you treat everybody in that space as equally front stage can be a place where there's some nuance and some tweaking to these concepts. Because remember, at the end of the day, for Goffman, it isn't that life is theater, right? He's saying that life is like, there's a structure to this. There's a structure to interaction. What makes me a teacher is not that I have a degree in sociology or even that I got hired by Harper College. What makes me a teacher is that every Tuesday from the time class starts to the time class ends, or if you're doing this in a different semester, right, it could be twice a week, it could be an evening class, it could be an online class, right? But whenever I am in interaction with students, I do and say teacher things. And because students respond to me with behaviors that signal that they accept and recognize that claim, that impression, right? Yeah, clearly you are the teacher. And they respond to me with student behaviors, which indicates that they see me as the teacher. And I see them as students because I'm responding to their student behaviors with teacher behaviors. So we're kind of mutually constructing our identities here, ourselves, in these various interactions that we have over the course of our day. And we'll come back and we'll talk more about impression management and some of these other elements and some of the nuances of selfhood under these particular theories. But I just wanted to make sure everyone had a good general overview. I do want to say one more thing. There is a concept that's kind of related to this. It doesn't come from Goffman, but rather from scholars working in that Goffmanian tradition. And that is the concept of dramaturgical awareness. Dramaturgical awareness is the degree to which you are aware that you are, in essence, on stage, right? That people are forming impressions of you based on the things that you do and you say. Now, remember, people are always forming impressions of you. There's no way to get around that. Anytime you are in the presence of another person, they are taking in information about you, which is shaping the impression they have of you. And in part helping to establish yourself in their mind. Sometimes, though, we are keenly aware that that's happening, and other times not so much. We would say in situations where we are very aware of that dramaturgical awareness is high. In situations where we're not really noting that this is occurring, we would say that dramaturgical awareness is low. So one of the things that people like to say about being with their friends is that they can be themselves. Now remember, you are always a self, so that statement on its face is kind of problematic and subject to some pushback and some picking. But I think what people mean when they say that is that they don't feel like they're being evaluated. They don't feel like they have to work at managing the impressions that others have of you, because these others, these people who are your friends and are close to you, they've already formed an impression of you, and it's clear that they're going to tolerate that identity, that self that you have with them, because they've done it in the past. So we feel like we're not being evaluated the same way we might feel when we're meeting somebody for the first time, or when we're on a job interview, or some situation where we might be more aware of the fact that people are forming impressions of us, and we might be much more on our guard, right? Our behavior is going to shift as a result of the degree to which dramaturgical awareness is high or low. So again, you see sort of the importance of social others in the development of this particular kind of understanding of self. It's a little different than the way that we do it internally, according to people like Mead and Cooley and even Kuhn and Zurcher. But nevertheless, right, I mean, Goffman isn't saying that those guys are wrong. Remember, he says that internal conceptions of the self are less important than what gets expressed, not that they're not important. So he's kind of creating a different sort of space here. And as I said, we will spend more time talking about this and the way that operates as we get into talking about impression management and things as they kind of actually unfold in the context of interactions. So until we do, I will say goodbye.